Well, good morning. It's about time to get started with our class this morning. If you would be opening your Bibles to Luke chapter 17. Luke chapter 17, we're going to begin our study this morning in verse 11. Luke chapter 17, verse 11. Good to see everybody this morning. Good to have some guests with us today. Glad to have you all with us, and hope you enjoy your time with us today. Jadon, would you lead our prayer to start us off this morning, please?
Most loving and gracious Heavenly Father, we're thankful for the presence of each and every one here today. We pray that we keep Jesus on our mind and in our hearts as we're about to enter this study with Josh. May he have a ready recollection of the things he wants to say. And we're thankful for all your many blessings you bless us with daily. We're thankful, Lord, for your Son, Jesus Christ, who through him we have hope for eternal life. We're thankful, Lord, for this land in which we live. And we pray, Lord, that this country will turn back to thee and try to do your will. And pray, Lord, that you forgive us for many sins and we might have a home in heaven with thee. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Luke chapter 17 and verse 11. It says, "And it came to pass, as he went to Jerusalem, that he passed through the midst of Samaria and Galilee." So Jesus is traveling to Jerusalem, and the route that he's taking is taking him right along the border of these two regions, Galilee and Samaria. Of course, as we've talked about in previous studies, with Jesus being a Jew, it would have been the common practice of the Jews to remain in Galilee. They would not have crossed the border over into Samaria. But as we're going to see as we go through this section, because of the closeness of the vicinity of that border, Jesus is going to come into contact with a Samaritan. Now we know previously that he's already interacted with some Samaritans. We know that he has shown God's love, has shown forgiveness to those not only who were Jews, but also those who were of Samaria as well. But notice it says that as he was passing through this area, he's in Galilee, he's close to Samaria, but as he's traveling along, verse 12 says that he entered into a certain village. And there met him 10 men that were lepers, which stood afar off. Now I want to spend just a little bit of time this morning talking about this disease of leprosy. Leprosy was something that in that day and time was very common. It was something also that was greatly misunderstood. Science has proven in the thousands of years since biblical times that leprosy is not as contagious as was once believed. Also, there is now a cure for leprosy as long as it is not in its advanced stages. But in those days, it was common for a person who had any type of skin lesions, skin bruising, any type of disfigurement, anything of that nature, oftentimes was passed off as leprosy, whether it really was or not. But those who had true leprosy, it was a terrible disease to live with. In fact, it has been described as the living dead. Because ultimately what would happen, leprosy was caused by bacterial infection. You know, we're very familiar today with bacterial infections. You know, we get those, we get antibiotics, and in a few days we're better. Well, they didn't have all of that knowledge back then. Well, leprosy was caused by a bacterial infection that would attack various parts of the body. It would begin by attacking the nerves, and then it would spread to the skin. Then it would spread many times to the eyes. They would lose their eyesight. And ultimately, what would happen, the first indications that many people had that they even had leprosy was they would begin losing feeling in their hands and their feet. Much like we see today with diabetics who begin to suffer from neuropathy. They begin to lose some of that feeling. Because something that I did not realize until I started looking into this more, leprosy can actually exist in a person for up to 20 years before there is any visible signs of that person having leprosy.
Josh, do you think about what we've had as sort of like what they had, because we had to be away from people when we had it and all that? We were kind of in a state where we had about the same thing they had.
Well, see, what a lot of that stems from, at least in my opinion, is a lack of knowledge.
Right.
It was something new. We didn't know what it was. Well, back then, they saw people with leprosy. They saw that it was this horrible, disfiguring disease. And they immediately thought, well, this has to be contagious. It has to be that which is easily spread. Therefore, we can't have them around society. Well, science has now proven that there is only a 5% chance of someone with leprosy actually spreading it to someone else. And the only way, really, that leprosy is able to be spread, used to they believed that, those who would care for them in their medical needs, if they come into contact with their skin, that they might be able to contract this disease. That's been proven to be false. Leprosy only spreads through bodily fluids and mainly through saliva. And so a person would have to be in close proximity to someone when they're sneezing or coughing or things of that nature. And even then, it is not easily transmitted. But another thing that I found interesting is leprosy was something that was generally common only among those who were living in poverty. It was not common among those who had good medical health care. It was not common among those who had good personal hygiene, things of that nature. In fact, we still see some instances of leprosy every year in the United States, about 200 cases a year, and the overwhelming majority of those are among those who are homeless, those who are living on the streets. But you look in certain countries of the world that we would generally refer to as third world countries, and we see that there is still a much higher incidence of leprosy simply because of the cleanliness and because of the lack of medical attention. And so in this situation, we see that there was almost a climate of hysteria surrounding leprosy, because it was so unknown. People didn't know how to handle it. In those days, they didn't have antibiotics, so they didn't have a lot of the means of treating that. It was very rare for someone to contract leprosy and then the leprosy go away. Generally, it was something that continued to progress until they passed away. But here were men. Jesus is entering into this village, and as they were commanded to do, they were outside of the village. They were a distance away from everyone. And they cried out to Jesus. Here were men who had exhausted every other option. No one was able to help them. They had been cast out from society. The only ones that they could be around were other lepers. But they had heard of Jesus. And as they saw Jesus coming into this village, they cried out to him. Notice in verse 13, it says they lifted up their voices and they cried out to him, saying, "Jesus, Master, have mercy on us." And so recognizing the situation that they were in and the severity of the disease, knowing that it was one that more than likely would end up being lethal, They had heard about Jesus and knew what he was capable of. And so they cried out to him. And in the statement that they made, they said, Jesus, Master. Or another way that this could be termed would be Jesus, Rabbi, Jesus, Teacher. They recognized him as someone with authority, someone that they could look up to. And so they cry out to him and they ask him to have mercy upon them. But if we look in the next verse, we see something interesting.
Josh, Naaman found out what he had to do to be healed, didn't he?
That's right. That's right. You know, he was told that he had to go and dip in the Jordan River 7 times. He didn't want to do it. He didn't think that he should have to do that. He thought that it should be something miraculous take place. He didn't think that he should have to do anything to bring that about. But when he did, he was healed.
So we always have an avenue with the Lord to pray for stuff like that to happen to us. I don't mean he don't touch us and do it, but he has powers if he wants to.
Sure. God has the ability to do anything he wants to do in that regard. I mean, God has the ability to miraculously heal us if he wants to.
Right.
But let's look at what Jesus told him to do. And when he saw them, he said unto them, Go show yourselves unto the priests. Let's stop right there for a moment. What was the purpose of this statement? Why did Jesus, instead of just telling them, you know what, you're healed, go on your way? Why did Jesus tell them, go and show yourself to the priests? Okay. Under the law of Moses, a person with leprosy, the only way that they could be deemed clean and allowed back into society, they had to go before the priests, and the priests had to essentially examine them and make sure that their leprosy had indeed been healed. And then they were allowed to function back in society. And remember, when Jesus was alive on this earth, what law was he living under? The law of Moses. And so ultimately what he was doing was in keeping with the law. And so he told them to go and to show yourselves to the priests. And the verse goes on to say, and it came to pass that as they went, so they weren't healed immediately? No. Notice it says, as they went. They had to make a decision, didn't they? They had to decide, just like Naaman had to decide, if he was going to do what he was commanded to do. Naaman had to go dip in the Jordan 7 times. These lepers were told, go show yourself to the priests. Well, what if they had just thrown up their hands and say, well, there's no sense. I still have leprosy. Look at me. Look at the disfigurement. Look at the signs that I'm still a leper. Why would I go and show myself to the priest this way? You know, they could have said that. But no. There had to be an act of obedience. They showed faith. They decided, what do we have to lose? They placed their faith in Jesus. And it says that as they were heading toward the priests, as they were going that way, they were healed. Now think with me for just a moment. Imagine that was you in that situation. You've been suffering with this disease. As I said, it can lie dormant in a person's body, or at least be invisible in a person's body for up to 20 years. You can feel the physical effects. Some people have described it as almost mimicking arthritis in some ways until it really gets far advanced. Imagine the suffering that these people went through. And then they're traveling along, still suffering, still in pain, and all of a sudden it's gone. Just like when Naaman came up out of the waters of the Jordan that 7th time. The text said that his skin became like that of a baby. Pure, clean. And I would imagine that's what happened with these men as well. They're traveling along. Jesus has told them to go see the priests. And suddenly, their leprosy is gone. A lot of times, I think we look at this situation, and maybe we're a little too hard on some of these men. Because notice what the next verse says. It says, and one of them. Remember, there were 10. It says, and one of them, when he saw that he was healed, turned back and with a loud voice glorified God. Now, I'm not discounting the fact that these men should have all shown gratitude. But imagine being in their shoes. How many of those men, as soon as they were healed, how many of them do you think probably thought, I get to go home. I get to go see my family. I get to get back to my normal way of life. Sure, they were. Yes, they were excited. They were overwhelmed with emotion.
It all boiled down though when they realized, I didn't do things like I should have. I mean, I've done that myself. I think later, I just took it for granted. That's our human side, I guess.
It is. But something that's interesting about this scenario, about this picture that we see here. There was only one of these men that when this happened, rather than go on, see the priests, or go about their day-to-day life, he immediately was overwhelmed with gratitude and went back to Jesus. Now, we're going to see that there was a factor here that I personally believe contributed to this attitude of gratitude on this man's part. Because if you notice what it says that he fell down on his face at his feet, giving him thanks, and he was a Samaritan. Well, first off, did the Samaritans have any duty whatsoever to go before the priests? No. They were not Jews. Did he have any... I guess let me put it this way. When Jesus told these men to go before the priests, this Samaritan believed enough in what Jesus had to say that he went to do something that he didn't have to do. That's right. We saw that initially with the Samaritan woman that Jesus met with. He talked with her. He forgave her. Well, now we have another instance. And there are many scholars that believe that with these lepers, there are many that take the stance that the 9 who did not go back to Jesus were more than likely Jews. Now, there's nothing in the text that would indicate that to us, but there are many who take that stance. And they say that more than likely the 9 were Jews, and they probably went ahead and went to the priests and got their endorsement of the priest and then went about their day-to-day lives. Now, once again, there's nothing in the text to indicate that. But let's think about this one man for just a moment. Here was a man, number one, that because of his nationality, he shouldn't have been speaking to Jesus in the first place. At least that was the custom of the day. He had no reason to refer to Jesus as master or rabbi, because to the Samaritans, they had no duty to the priests or to the law of Moses. Whenever Jesus told these men to go before the priests, this man had no duty to do that under the law that was in effect. But when Jesus told him to do this, he had enough faith in Jesus to act. And so here was a man that up to this point had ultimately been treated as a second-class citizen by the Jews. In fact, the Jews viewed the Samaritans as dogs, as half-breeds. They weren't as good as the Jews. But yet, here was a Jew in Jesus showing compassion on a Samaritan, healing this disease that he has. This Samaritan is overwhelmed. And he comes back. He falls down at Jesus' feet. He's grateful for what Jesus has done. And you know, so often I can remember as a young child being in Bible class and this story being taught. And so often what we focus on in this story is the fact that one showed gratitude and the others didn't. And while I believe that certainly we can take that from this, I think there is a much deeper meaning that we see here. And we talked about this a little bit on Wednesday night in our class, in the fact that when Jesus was here, as Sue mentioned just a while ago, all barriers were coming down. When Jesus was here, He showed compassion upon every person. It didn't matter what their nationality was. It did not matter if they were Jew or Gentile. It did not matter if they lived in Galilee or if they lived in Samaria. If it was someone who was in need that was willing to come to Him and to believe in Him, then He was going to reach out to that person.
The end result is He's always there for us.
That's right.
If we but obey Him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now look at verse 17. And Jesus answering said, were there not 10 cleansed? But where are the 9? So He asked this man the question. He says, while you were traveling along, were you the only one that was healed? No. All 10 of them received this cleansing. But He asked the question, where's everybody else? Where's the other 9? Verse 18, there are not found that return to give glory to God, save this stranger. And this description, stranger, is one of the passages that is often pointed out, saying that more than likely this man was a Gentile and the others were Jews. Because oftentimes the Gentiles, the Samaritans, they were referred to as strangers. And so these Jews, who should have known who Jesus was, who should have been the most grateful, who should have been the ones to come back and to give glory to God, to praise Jesus, they weren't the ones that came back. But this stranger, this one that had not been raised with the knowledge of who the Messiah was going to be, who to be looking for, this man that had always been looked down upon by everyone else, he came back.
Don't you think that maybe the other 9, being Jews, were so excited to tell the Pharisees what occurred that they couldn't wait to get there to show them?
Well,
I mean, that's kind of what I think, just to spread the good news. Of course, it made me mad, I'm sure, but still.
well, and one thing that we need to look at with this, and this is why I made the point about possibly they went on to the priests and received that, is because under the law of Moses and under the way that they interpreted the law during the first century, if those lepers had just gone into the villages and started proclaiming what had happened without going to the priest first, their lives would have been at risk. And so there would have been things that they would have still had to do in order to actually go and proclaim this. They were not allowed to enter back into society until they had, and there was a, we often think of things in our modern culture. We think about contracts or certificates of endorsement. There was some kind of form or some type of document that the priest would have to give, indicating that they had been examined and had been deemed pure. And once they had that, then they were able to go back and function in society. Well, if these men that everyone knew had been lepers had just immediately gone back into the villages, in those days, with the lack of knowledge that they had, you would have had mass hysteria. People would have been terrified because a leper was in their midst. And going back to what was mentioned earlier, it's kind of like the reaction that we've seen with some people to COVID. Any time that they find out that they've been in close proximity to someone with COVID, they close themselves off. And so much of that, as I said, comes from a lack of knowledge, a lack of understanding of things. And so, looking at this scenario, here was a man who was the least likely to come back and show gratitude, but he was the only one that did. And I think also we can see this same whenever we look at the parable of the Good Samaritan. The Samaritan was the least likely person to come along and help that injured Jew. The priest came along. He didn't even give eye service. He didn't even go over and look at the person. Passed by on the other side. The Levite, he at least came over and looked. But nevertheless, he went on his way and didn't help. But then a Samaritan, the one that many of the Jews would have said, well, he's just going to come along and finish the job. Here's a man that won't show compassion. He's not going to help. But yet he was the one that went above and beyond.
Well, don't you think, too, that this is showing in all of those cases that just because somebody has a certain title or they live a certain way doesn't mean that they're not good people?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, some of the nicest, most helpful people that I've ever met in my life committed to the Glory Church.
That's true. And it's a fact. A person can live a good moral life and still be lost. There are many good people in the world around us who are lost. But also, another thing that I want to point out from this, it's been my experience that you take someone who has lived a very sinful life. Now let me qualify what I mean there. We all sin and fall short of the glory of God. We understand that. All of us, before becoming a child of God, we were all lost in sin. We all needed to become a child of God. But there are some who live lives more deeply ingrained in sin than others. I know one time in a Bible class, I had someone speak up and they made the statement. They said, something that I've always struggled with. They said, I grew up in the church. I was taught from a young age how a Christian is supposed to act, what a Christian is to do and what they're not supposed to do. She said, and then when I became a Christian, she said, it really didn't seem like life was that much different because I had already been living it. But then on the other hand, you take someone that was not brought up in the church, that was not trained in biblical morality and the concepts of what is sinful and what is not. When that person becomes a child of God, they're going to see a more drastic change in their life. Now, oftentimes, in my experience, that person that sees that more dramatic change in their life oftentimes grows in their faith more rapidly as one that doesn't see that.
When I was growing up, my grandpa was a Baptist preacher. And I never did meet him. He died before I was born. But anyway, dad and mom were pretty well Baptist, you know. And where we lived, there was no Church of Christ for 10 miles. We didn't have where to go. And so my sister, I had a sister that was I was really close to. And she told me a lot. And so finally I went to church with her. It was so different. And I thought, they were always talking about, they had little booklets that we read in class of what was happening in Timbuktu. I mean, who cares, you know, if they're over there doing it, good, but you're interested in your soul right now because you haven't obeyed God yet. But anyway, it was just such a huge difference the way it was taught and given to us, you know.
Well, and I think that what happens a lot of times is whenever we see something major happen in our life, some type of major change that is there, it's something that has a deeper impact on us than something that maybe we ease into. You think about those who are suffering with chronic illnesses, those who know that over time their illnesses are going to get worse. It's easier for that person to come to terms with that than someone who just immediately goes from health to sickness overnight. They have time to rationalize and time to accept that. But you think about, from the standpoint that I mentioned a while ago, you have someone that has been raised in the church, that has been taught about God all their life, that has been raised in a Christian home, and then they become a Christian. Yes, they were still lost in sin. Yes, they still sinned and fell short of the glory of God. Yes, Jesus still cleansed them of their sins. But is their life really going to be that much different from the way that it's been up to that point?
It should be. I mean, there's a relationship as you mature with Jesus. I have a hard time understanding that.
Well, and what I'm saying is not necessarily the fact that, you don't have the relationship with Jesus. I'm talking about just merely the operation of our life. If we've been raised in that type of setting, then that's something that we're just going to continue with, and it's going to continue to deepen. But you take someone that has never known about God, that has never understood about faith, that never knew that they were a sinner, they come to the realization that they need to obey the gospel and they become a Christian. A lot of times, a person, and I'm not saying every time, but a lot of times a person in that type of scenario, a person who either felt they had no hope or a person who had no knowledge that there was something better, a lot of times they're a lot more grateful. A lot of times they jump in there and they grow and they mature faster in their faith because they are so thankful for that. They recognize that gratitude.
See, I understand that, but the other, with the Christian that was brought up, I would think would feel that deep gratitude of becoming a Christian, and also.
Well, and as I said, I'm not saying that they don't feel that, but a lot of times you don't sense as much of a change. You don't see as much difference in your life as someone who goes from living a very sinful, very worldly life to one that now is transforming into the image of Christ.
I certainly was one of those that was raised in the church, and it did cross my mind, did I truly repent when I became a Christian? Because before that I was living like a Christian, I was, of course, raised until that time when I understood, but I was raised more or less doing the right things, maybe for a different reason, maybe because of fear of the belt, different things like that, or maybe my own desire desire to please my mom and dad type thing. But when I came to the point of understanding about Christ, and that I had to choose, you know, in this world, then the reasoning, the motive changed. I don't serve, you know, so much because my mom and dad
Right.
might with me, but it's more because Jesus wants me to. I know enough now that I can give my life to Christ.
So what you're saying is your mentality and your motive changed, but the mode itself didn't really change all that much, but your understanding, yes, absolutely. But you take someone that's not been raised up with that mode and with that training, that's a pretty dramatic change.
And you're right, I've noticed that too, that the zeal of those people that really came out of a bad situation, and really their zeal seems to be more.
Absolutely.
Such a dramatic change.
And I believe that that's why we see so much with the Samaritans and then later with the Gentiles from other nations, such a strong desire to come to Christ and to obey the gospel, because it was something that was new. It was something that gave them hope when they felt that they didn't have it. Whereas the Jews, they were brought up under this other system, being taught that they had hope, but they needed to be looking for someone other than Jesus.
Don't you think the Pharisees were present at this time?
Oh, I'm sure.
There was a crowd around him, no doubt. And Jesus took the opportunity, no doubt, well, where's the other 9, who were probably all Jews?
Yeah.
You know, and he was showing, this person is a real person, not a dog, as you say.
That's right.
But he actually was thankful to God.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, well, we're going to stop there for this morning. Lord willing, next Sunday morning, we'll pick up in verse 20.